I pulled into the driveway just before noon, engine ticking in the cold, and sat there longer than I should have. The house looked the same. White siding, black shutters, the porch my mother had painted yellow the summer before she died. Vivian had repainted it gray. Tasteful, she called it. I called it erasure, but only to myself. I hadn't been home in 14 months. Not because I didn't want to see my father, but because every visit required passing through Vivian first, and Vivian charged a toll I was getting tired of paying. Tonight, the Pinewood Fire and Rescue Association was honoring my father for 30 years of service. 30 years of pulling people from wreckage, of driving through ice storms, of carrying strangers out of burning buildings while his own family sat at the kitchen table wondering if tonight was the night the phone would ring different. He deserved every second of that ceremony. I was here to make sure he got it. The radio hummed low. A local station ran a promo between songs. Tonight, at the Pinewood Community Hall, we celebrate Captain James Beckett. Doors open at 6. All are welcome. My father's name sounded sturdy in someone else's voice. Dependable. The way people always described him, the way he always was, except when it came to Vivian. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and walked to the door. She opened it before I knocked. Nora. The name stretched in her mouth like taffy. Well, you actually came. Hi, Vivian. Her eyes moved down my body, assessing. Jeans, navy sweater, flat shoes, clean, unremarkable. I had learned years ago not to give her ammunition through clothing. You're not wearing that tonight, she said. It wasn't a question. I just drove 4 hours. 4 hours and you couldn't plan an outfit? She stepped aside to let me in, sighing the way she always did when I existed in a way she found inconvenient. Your father's been stressed enough. The mayor's coming. Pastor Griggs. The whole fire commission. I need tonight to be seamless. She said, I need the way other people say we agreed. Vivian had a gift for turning her preferences into everyone's obligations. Where's Dad? Garage. Ironing his dress uniform. She paused, then added, softer, like she was sharing a confidence. He's nervous. Don't make it worse. I set my bag by the stairs and walked toward the garage without responding. Behind me, I heard her exhale, the theatrical kind that begged someone to ask what was wrong. My father stood at a folding table, pressing the collar of his navy dress uniform with the kind of attention he gave to everything that mattered. When he looked up, I saw it. The flash of recognition, the softening around his eyes, the quick tightening that followed. Love and discomfort, arriving together the way they always did. Nora. Hey, Dad. He set the iron down. Glad you made it. Wouldn't miss it. He nodded, eyes drifting back to the uniform. Safe territory. Fabric held still when you pressed it. Daughters didn't. Vivian treating you all right? He asked, not looking up. She's fine. He heard the lie and let it live. My father wasn't cruel. He was simply a man who had spent 3 decades running into burning buildings but couldn't face a hard conversation in his own kitchen. Vivian had figured that out early, and she used it like a tool. I went back inside. Vivian was at the dining table arranging printed programs. Each one featured my father's photo, his service dates, and a brief bio she had clearly written. She glanced up as I entered. I should tell you, she said, voice dropping to that confidential register she used when delivering calculated wounds. People are going to ask about you tonight. Okay, what you're doing now, where you are, that kind of thing. I'll handle it. She straightened a stack of programs, tapping the edges precise. Your father tells people you work at a hospital in Baltimore. I waited. That's his way of making it sound more than it is. She smiled, not unkindly. That was the worst part. Vivian's cruelty always wore kindness like a coat. People remember. Nora, they remember when someone had potential and then just... She waved her hand vaguely. Settled. I held her gaze. I didn't settle. Sweetheart. The word landed like a pat on the head. You answer phones at a clinic. There's no shame in that. But let's not pretend it's what anyone expected from you. She held up a program. Your father worked his whole life for tonight. Let's keep the focus where it belongs. There it was. My father's honor, weaponized into a leash. Behave. Stay small. Don't complicate my evening. The old version of me would have corrected her. The current version knew better. You don't argue with someone who has already decided what the truth is. You wait for the truth to speak for itself. I'll be ready by 5, I said, and went upstairs. The guest room hadn't changed. Same quilt, same view of the backyard, same crack in the ceiling I used to stare at as a teenager when the house felt too small for my ambitions. I sat on the bed and pressed my hands flat against my knees. Vivian had been shaping the narrative since she married my father 8 years ago. In her version, I was the daughter who almost became something. Started medical school, couldn't handle it, dropped out, now worked front desk at some clinic. She told the story so often and so confidently that it became the town's accepted history. My father never corrected it because my father never corrected Vivian. And I never corrected it because the details of my actual career weren't things I discussed at Thanksgiving dinner. Privacy is a strange thing. In a small town, it looks identical to failure. I showered, dressed in a simple black dress, and went downstairs at 10 to 5. Vivian stood in the kitchen in a burgundy gown, pearls at her throat, hair sculpted into a configuration that must have taken an hour. She looked at me the way a casting director looks at an understudy. "That'll do," she said. We drove to the hall in my father's truck. Vivian sat up front, narrating logistics. Seating chart here, donation box there. The caterer was running 10 minutes behind. Pastor Griggs wanted to say a few words before the main program. My father nodded along, hands steady on the wheel. The practiced calm of a man who had long ago decided that silence was easier than conflict. "And Nora," Vivian said, twisting in her seat to face me. "If anyone asks what you do, just say you're in healthcare. Keep it vague. No one needs the whole story." "All right." She studied me for a reaction, a flinch, a flash of anger. I gave her nothing. Calm was a skill I had paid for dearly, and I had gotten very good at it. The Pinewood Community Hall sat at the edge of town like a monument to modesty. Brick walls, metal roof, an American flag out front that had faded to the exact shade of exhaustion. Inside, the air smelled like coffee, floor wax, and institutional hope. Vivian entered the way she always entered rooms, like she had personally arranged every molecule. She scanned the space, noted the placement of chairs, adjusted a flower arrangement with surgical precision, and began greeting guests as though they had come to see her. My father moved through the crowd differently. People reached for him with genuine warmth, handshakes that lasted too long, eyes that glistened. 30 years. James, we owe you, Cap. This town wouldn't be the same. He accepted each one with a nod and a quiet word, uncomfortable with admiration but unable to refuse it. I drifted to the back of the hall. Old habit. In rooms where I wasn't sure of my welcome, I chose walls over centers. From there, I heard them. The whispers. Not hostile, just small-town curious. "That's his daughter, right? The one who dropped out of med school. Shame. James never talks about it. Vivian says she works at a front desk somewhere in Maryland." I kept my expression neutral. Years of training had made my face a locked door. The program began. A high school student led the Pledge of Allegiance. Pastor Griggs delivered an invocation that was equal parts gratitude and gentle self-promotion. The fire chief spoke about my father's decades of service with the reverence people reserve for men who have earned it quietly. I stood in the back and clapped when others clapped, smiled when smiled at. A woman I vaguely recognized from church leaned over. "It must be nice to be home, Nora." "It is. And what are you up to these days?" There it was. The question Vivian had planted like a landmine across every conversation in town. "I'm in Baltimore, medical field." The woman's expression flickered with something between pity and politeness. "Oh, well, that's nice." Vivian appeared at my elbow as if summoned by the scent of an uncontrolled narrative. "Nora, honey." Her voice carried the bright authority of a hostess correcting a wayward guest. "We're short-handed with the refreshments. Could you take the coffee station? Margaret's back is acting up." She held out a serving apron. In front of the churchwoman. In front of 3 other guests who had turned to watch. A serving apron. At my father's ceremony. The silence that followed was mine. I held it for 2 full seconds, long enough to feel its weight, not long enough for anyone else to notice. "Of course," I said. Vivian's satisfaction was immediate. A slight lift of the chin, a softening of her smile. She had placed me exactly where she wanted. Useful, visible, diminished. I tied the apron and moved to the coffee station. Poured cups, handed out napkins, nodded politely at people who didn't quite know where to look. A few older firefighters thanked me. One patted my shoulder. Good girl, helping out. Good girl. I was 31 years old. Across the hall, my father stood near the podium, receiving a framed commendation. His face held that particular mix of pride and discomfort that defined him. Vivian stood beside him, one hand on his arm, the other gesturing gracefully at guests. She looked like a woman who had choreographed every detail of the evening. And she had. Including me. I refilled the coffee carafe and returned to the station. The hall buzzed with warmth and conversation. Nobody looked at the woman behind the coffee. That was the point. Then the front doors opened. I didn't notice at first. Noise shifted before silence did. Conversations near the entrance stuttered, then stopped. Bodies turned. The ripple moved through the hall like wind through tall grass. A man walked in. Late 50s, silver hair, dark suit that fit the way expensive things do, without trying. He moved with the kind of presence that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Behind him, 2 people in professional attire followed at a respectful distance. The fire chief straightened. The MC fumbled with his notes. Vivian's eyes sharpened with instant calculation. Important person. Opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC said, recovering. We're honored to welcome Dr. Samuel Hartwell, former Surgeon General of the United States. The title landed like a stone in still water. Murmurs spread, heads craned. My father looked surprised but pleased. Vivian was already adjusting her pearls. Dr. Hartwell moved through the hall with the unhurried confidence of a man who had walked into far more important rooms. He shook hands with the fire chief, nodded at the pastor, accepted a program from a volunteer. Vivian positioned herself in his path. Dr. Hartwell, she said, extending her hand. I'm Vivian Beckett, James's wife. What an honor to have you here. He shook her hand politely. Thank you. I'm here at the invitation of a colleague. Oh? Vivian's smile widened. Do you know someone in Pinewood? Hartwell didn't answer. His gaze had moved past her, scanning the room with the steady focus of someone who knew exactly who they were looking for. His eyes landed on me. On the woman standing behind the coffee station wearing a serving apron, and then he did something that broke the room in half. He walked away from Vivian mid-conversation, past the fire chief, past the podium, past 200 guests, and crossed the entire hall directly toward me. I set down the coffee carafe, untied the apron, folded it once, placed it on the table. Movements automatic, precise, the muscle memory of someone accustomed to composure under pressure. Hartwell stopped in front of me and extended his hand. Dr. Beckett. His voice carried clearly through the silent hall, not shouted, simply unobstructed, because every other sound in the room had died. I hoped I'd find you here. He shook my hand firmly, both of his covering mine, the way senior physicians greet colleagues they respect. When I heard James Beckett was being honored tonight, he continued, I thought there couldn't possibly be 2. I had to come see for myself. I returned the handshake steadily. Dr. Hartwell, it's good to see you. Good to see me? He laughed, the warm, genuine kind. I should be saying that to you. After what you pulled off in September, I should be taking notes. The words were casual, conversational, but their meaning detonated silently across the room. He turned slightly, still holding my hand, and addressed the hall as though correcting an oversight. For those who don't know, and I suspect most of you don't, Doctor, Nora Beckett is the youngest chief of pediatric surgery in the history of Johns Hopkins Hospital. The sentence hit the air and hung there. Chief. Pediatric surgery. Johns Hopkins. Someone in the second row dropped a program. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Her team performed the first successful separation of conjoined twins at Hopkins in over a decade this past September, Hartwell continued. It made the New England Journal. It made national news. I watched the press conference 3 times. He looked at me. Frankly, it made me jealous. Silence. The kind that has weight. I felt every set of eyes in the room recalibrate. Felt the whispers rearranging themselves. Felt the woman from church who had pitied me 5 minutes ago staring at the back of my head. Across the hall, Vivian stood exactly where Hartwell had left her. Her hand was still half raised from the interrupted handshake. Her face had gone completely blank, the kind of blank that happens when every prepared expression fails simultaneously. My father stood beside her, commendation still in his hands, mouth slightly open, staring at me as though I had just materialized from another dimension. Hartwell released my hand and stepped back. I won't take up any more of the evening. Captain Beckett's the one being honored tonight, and rightly so. He turned toward my father. Sir, your service to this community is extraordinary, and if I may say, your daughter inherited every bit of your dedication. My father couldn't speak. His lips moved, but nothing came out. He nodded once, stiffly, the nod of a man who is rearranging the architecture of everything he believed to be true. The MC cleared his throat and attempted to resume the program, but the room had shifted on its axis. Conversations restarted slowly, like engines turning over in cold weather. Every sentence pointed in a new direction. Did he say Johns Hopkins? Chief of surgery. She's 31. Vivian told me she worked at a front desk. That's what Vivian told everybody. The last whisper was the one that mattered. Vivian moved first. Survival instinct. She crossed the hall toward Hartwell and me, smile rebuilt, voice recalibrated to a pitch of delighted surprise. Dr. Hartwell, I had no idea you knew our Nora. She laughed, a sound like thin glass. She's always been so modest about her work. Hartwell looked at her with the clinical neutrality of a man who had spent 40 years reading people. Modest? He said. Doctor. Beckett is one of the most accomplished surgeons of her generation. I wouldn't call that modesty. I'd call it extraordinary restraint. The correction was gentle. The damage was absolute. Vivian's smile held, but the muscles around her eyes failed. Well, we've always been so proud of her, she managed. Have you? Hartwell said. Not a question. My father appeared beside Vivian. Up close, the shock was carved into every line of his face. He looked at me the way you look at a photograph you've been reading upside down for years. Nora. My name came out rough. What did he say? You heard him, Dad. Chief of... You're a... Yes. At Johns Hopkins. Yes. He blinked several times rapidly, as though trying to clear something from his vision. You told me you worked at the hospital. I do work at the hospital. You said you were busy. That you couldn't talk about details. I was busy. I was in surgery. Behind him, Vivian's composure was cracking in real time. Thomas James, she caught herself. Honey, let's not do this here. You told me, she answered phones. My father's voice was low, stripped of everything except bewilderment. You told me she dropped out. I said what everyone assumed. Nobody assumed anything, Vivian. His voice cracked. You told them. You told me. You told everyone who would listen that my daughter failed. She never corrected me. She shouldn't have had to. The sentence landed in the space between them and stayed. Vivian's eyes darted toward me, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw something beneath the polish. Fear. Not of me, of the room. Of 200 people who had just learned that every story she had told for 8 years was fiction. I was trying to protect this family's image, she said, voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. By erasing my daughter's career? By managing expectations. She never told us anything. What was I supposed to do? Ask. My father's voice broke on the word. You were supposed to ask her. I watched them from 3 feet away. Close enough to intervene, choosing not to. This wasn't my argument. This was the one my father had been avoiding for 8 years, and he needed to have it without me providing the words. Vivian turned to me. You could have said something. At any point, you could have told us. I told Dad I was at Hopkins. You said you worked at a hospital. Johns Hopkins is a hospital, Vivian. Her mouth opened and closed. My father rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture of a man surfacing from something deep. How long? He asked me quietly. How long have you been? This. I finished my fellowship 4 years ago. I was appointed chief 18 months ago. 4 years. The number settled over him like a physical weight. 4 years of phone calls where he'd asked politely how work was going and I'd said fine and he'd believed Vivian's version because it was easier than pressing for mine. I watched the news, he said slowly. The twins. Last September. I saw it on TV. Vivian changed the channel. He turned to look at his wife. Vivian said nothing. You changed the channel, he repeated, voice barely audible. I didn't know it was her. You didn't want to know. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was exhausted. The silence of a man who had just discovered that the person managing his reality had been editing it. Dr. Hartwell had moved to a respectful distance, speaking with the fire chief, but his eyes returned to us periodically. He understood, as any physician would, that some operations required no assistance, only space. The rest of the ceremony proceeded with the strange, fractured energy of an event that has already been eclipsed by its own subplot. My father gave his speech. It was shorter than planned. His hands gripped the podium edges. He thanked the community, his colleagues, and the department. Then he paused. "I also want to thank my daughter," he said. "Dr. Nora Beckett, who I have not thanked nearly enough for anything." His voice splintered on the last word. Applause came, warm and complicated, the kind a room offers when it doesn't fully understand what it's witnessing, but senses it matters. Vivian sat in the front row, posture rigid, staring straight ahead as if looking at anything else might cause her to dissolve. After the program, guests moved through the hall in clusters. Several approached me. Handshakes, astonishment, questions I answered briefly. "Johns Hopkins? My lord, we had no idea. Your father must be so proud." Proud. The word kept landing differently now, depending on who said it. A young EMT from my father's station approached shyly. "Ma'am, my sister wants to be a surgeon. Could I give her your name?" "Of course." He beamed. And in that small moment, in a stranger's gratitude, I felt something I hadn't felt all evening. Warmth. I found my father outside, leaning against his truck in the parking lot, staring at the sky with the emptied expression of someone who has just survived something internal. "Nora. Dad." He didn't look at me right away. "I keep replaying conversations," he said. "Every phone call, every visit, every time Vivian said something about you, and I just nodded. You trusted your wife. I abandoned my daughter. That's not what happened. Isn't it?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were red. "You separated conjoined twins and I didn't even know. I watched it on television and my wife turned it off." I leaned against the truck beside him, our shoulders almost touching. "You couldn't have known what she was doing." "I should have. You're my kid. I should have known you didn't fail. You believed the version that was repeated most. That's not an excuse." "No," I said. "It's not." He was quiet for a long time. Crickets filled the spaces between us. "I used to carry you on my shoulders at the 4th of July parade," he said. "You'd grab my ears to steer. Left ear, go left. Right ear, go right." I remembered everything. "When did I stop steering?" he whispered. "When you let someone else hold the map." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had settled. Not resolution, not forgiveness, just clarity, painful and overdue. "I want to fix this," he said. "You can't rewrite 8 years. I can stop pretending the next 8 don't matter." I looked at him, really looked. Older than I expected. Thinner, gray at the temples spreading toward the crown, but his eyes held something I hadn't seen there in a long time. Intention. "Then start with believing me," I said. "Not Vivian. Me." He nodded. "I will. And boundaries, Dad. Real ones." He winced but didn't argue. Growth, I was learning, often looked like a wince. The hall doors opened behind us. Vivian stepped out, heels clicking the concrete with controlled precision. Even in defeat, she walked like a woman who owned the ground. "James." "We should go." He didn't turn around. "James." "Go home, Vivian." The words were quiet. Final. "Excuse me? Take the car. I'll get a ride." "You cannot be serious right now." "I am completely serious." She stared at his back, then at me. The hatred was no longer concealed beneath manners. It sat on her face, raw and unfiltered. "This is what you wanted," she said to me. "This little performance." I met her eyes without flinching. "I wanted to attend my father's ceremony. You handed me an apron." The sentence was simple. The truth inside it was not. Vivian turned on her heel and walked to the car. The door slammed. The engine started. Taillights disappeared down the road. My father exhaled. Long, shaking, the sound of a man putting something down that he'd been carrying too long. I should have done that years ago. Yes, I was afraid. "I know." He gave a broken, exhausted laugh. "You always did know." We stood there in the parking lot until the last cars left and the hall lights went dark. Father and daughter, side by side, surrounded by all the silence we'd accumulated and finally choosing to hold it together instead of apart. He drove me to the diner on Route 12, 2 coffees, a shared plate of fries neither of us touched. He asked questions, real ones, about my residency, my team, the twins, the 16-hour surgery, the moment I knew they would both survive. I answered without editing, without abbreviating, without protecting him from the size of my life. He cried once, quietly, into his napkin, when I described the parents' faces in the recovery room. He didn't apologize for the tears. That felt like progress. "I'm going to tell people," he said. "Everyone. I'm going to make sure they know. You don't have to campaign for me, Dad." "I'm not campaigning. I'm correcting." He paused. "There's a difference." At midnight, I stood to leave. He looked startled, the same way he had when I was 17 and packed for college. "Stay," he said. "I have a surgery Tuesday. Nora, I'll come back." "When?" "Soon. I promise." He walked me to my car. The hug was awkward, the way his hugs always were. Arms too tight, release too quick, like he was afraid of doing it wrong. But he held on 1 beat longer than usual. That beat contained everything. "I am proud of you," he said. "I need you to know that. Not because of the title. Because you sat behind that coffee table and didn't say a word. Because you let me figure it out on my own. Because you're better than what I gave you." I sat in the car for a moment after he stepped back. Watched him in the rearview mirror. Standing in the parking lot, lights. Hands in his pockets. Looking smaller and more honest than I had ever seen him. I drove away just after 12:30. The road was empty. The sky clear. The kind of darkness that feels like privacy rather than absence. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. A text from my chief resident, Dr. Beckett. Pre-op briefing confirmed for Tuesday, 6 a.m. Team is ready. I typed back one word. Good. The highway stretched ahead, and behind me, Pinewood shrank to a point of light. Then, nothing. I didn't feel triumph. Didn't feel vindication. Felt something quieter and harder to name. Relief, maybe. Or the particular exhaustion that comes from finally being seen after years of being narrated. Vivian would recover. Women like her always did. She'd reshape the story, find new edges, new angles. I always knew Nora was special. I just couldn't say. The town might believe her. It didn't matter, because the whispers had already changed. And this time, they weren't about me. They were about her. And if this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. Silence is not failure. Patience is not weakness. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand behind a coffee table in a serving apron and wait for the truth to walk through the front door. Not as revenge, not as spectacle, just as fact. Spoken clearly, in a room full of people who finally had to listen.